My name is Kavior Moon. I am a liberal arts faculty member here at SCI-Arc, and I'm also a steering committee member of an arts organization in Los Angeles called Gyopo, which is the organization that put together tonight's event. We invited Kyong to talk about some of his recent art projects, including the recent publication of his book, which he will be talking about tonight. Just a very quick word about Gyopo. Gyopo is a word that means diaspora in Korean. Gyopo is an arts organization. It's a coalition of diasporic Korean artists, curators, writers, other people in the art world here in Los Angeles who put together programs that look at issues surrounding contemporary art, culture, intersectionality, and social justice through what we hope are impactful programs and community alliances. There are, in addition to myself, two other steering committee members from Gyopo here, Young Soo Min, who's Professor Emerita at UC Irvine, and Ellie Lee, who is the Executive Director of Equitable Vitrines, a public art organization here in LA. And just in terms of Gyopo, in the past, over the past year and a half, we've organized talks with artists such as Annika Yi, Christine Sun Kim, the architect Min-Suk Cho of Mass Studies, who we paired Kyung earlier with at the Mack Center, and also a program with the filmmaker Andrew Ahn, a couple of panels on K-pop, of course. And just in terms of looking ahead, this fall, among other programs, we have a sort of an experimental immersive lecture by UCLA professors Judy Han and Jennifer Chung. They're going to be talking about and performing in some way the idea of protesting publics. And we're also going to be organizing a talk with Dohosa, the Korean artist, at LACMA later this year. And so if you're interested in these figures, you can sign up on the notepad that Ellie has. And if you put down your name and your email address, then we'll put you on mailing list, and so you'll be sort of updated on different upcoming events. All right, just a quick thank you to Kevin McMahon for letting us meet here in Kappe Library, as well as Stephanie Atlin and Maria Castellanos for helping with logistics. And also Carlos from Hennessy and Ingalls, who's here to sell copies of Kyung's book, Imagining Eurasia. So if you haven't purchased one and you want one, you should go see Carlos. And now on to tonight's program. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Kyong Park, our guest speaker tonight. Kyung has produced work in a variety of media at the intersections of art, architecture, and urbanism. He's characterized his practice as research art, in which the processes of research and art making are conjoined. He is currently professor of public culture at UCSD, where he has been teaching since 2007. I'm sure many of you know him as the founder of the Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York City, where he was executive director from 1982 to 98. He then went on to establish the International Center for Urban Ecology in Detroit, from 1998 to 2001, and then the Centrale Foundation for Future Cities in Rotterdam from 2005 to 2006. In 2006, he also co-led what was called the Lost Highway Expedition, a 25-day journey with a group of artists, architects, writers, and other participants, including myself for part of it, through 9 major cities in the former Yugoslavia and Albania. In 2010, he was artistic director and chief curator of the Anyang Public Art Project in South Korea, and that year he also had a solo exhibition, Kyong Park, New Silk Roads, at the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Lyon, Spain. So most recently, Kyung has expanded his New Silk Roads project into Imagining Eurasia, Visualizing a Continental History, a series of 3 exhibitions that were commissioned by and exhibited at the Asian Culture Center in Gwangju from 2015 to 18. And a book version of these trio of exhibitions are one of the reasons for gathering here today for the book launch. And just a few words to sort of wrap up some thoughts. just against the precipitous rise of ethno-nationalist and populist movements worldwide. It seems to be that the task of imagining Eurasia, or more broadly imagining new geographies, histories, and modes of belonging seem more urgent than ever before. And I think speaks to the relevance of what you're working on. So please help me in welcoming Kyong Park.
Thank you very much for coming and joining here, and also Kevin here at the library and SCI-Arc, and also Brett Hennessy of the Hennessy Ingalls Art and Architecture Bookstore just across the street from here, who has my copies of my books, and of course Kavior from Gyopo. Gyopo is really a great organization that I think a really wonderful thing for Korean Americans and others and more. And I strongly recommend joining the community and telling other people about how wonderful Gyopo is with their great lecture programs especially.
It's also fun.
Yeah, it's a good place, good people to be with, I would say, right. So this is a fake cover. And what I wanted that cover, but unfortunately my designer was cramped with so much work, so I ended up doing another cover that I'm not really happy about. But let's start with something. This is the entrance to basically Asia Culture Center was really an ambitious project, probably if not the largest or one of the largest cultural institution that unfortunately not that many people know about it, but it was built in the city of Gwangju. It opened 2015. Actually, they spent pretty close to, believe it or not, $1 billion US, but still you don't know that much about it. I can tell you a story, but that's also because the previous president was against the project, and she really didn't promote it very much. But I think it will emerge, and it's a huge space. They have different departments, and they do have an exhibition department. And I proposed the idea of this project to them years before, and they finally accepted it. And so I was commissioned. And basically, I took one of the smaller space they have, and I produced 3 exhibitions, one each year, and it was called Imagining New Eurasia. But the book is called Imagining Eurasia. Why is that? Okay. Well, there's no point about thinking about new. It was actually more important to really think about what Eurasia really is. So this is entrance to the space. I'll tell you later about how it's basically 20 by 40 meters, which is what, 70 feet by 60, did I say 60? 40 by 60. It's a pretty big space. But I had to entirely cover this space up. I'll explain later with showing the plan, because my work was going to be mostly through videos, photographs mostly, and also sound. So I needed to enclose entire space. So this is a kind of entrance to the exhibition space. And let me show you. Imagining New Russia is a research-based art project that I conceived and proposed to Asia Culture Center in Gwangju. I was commissioned by them to do this project from 2015 to 2017, one exhibition each year following that. And the first exhibition, which opened in 2015, is called Here, There, and Everywhere, Eurasian Cities. In there, we focused on the view of the continent from the localized lens of specific place, in this case, cities. A starting point for this project is a British geographer, Halford Mackinder, who in 1904 came up and announced the idea he called heartland theory. The basic idea of this heartland theory was that the world power, or the arena of the struggle for world power, moves away from the sea to back to the land. In his heartland theory, the center of Eurasia, he called it as a kind of a pivotal area where the East and West relationship hinges on. And I believe this continent really has always defined and shaped the world civilization in large extent. And I think it's under-recognized today how important that was. The second exhibition in 2016 is called From, To, and In Between, subtitled as A Theater of Network. This one looked at in terms of how different kind of movements through the continent, such as people, knowledge, and other materials that have moved through the continent through its different routes, which include old Silk Roads and new Silk Roads. Eurasia is not and should not be a single identity. It's a multitudinal idea. It's a multitude of many different society, culture, and language. And this complexity is what makes Eurasia important, powerful, and dynamic. And that complexity, that individuality, and that specificity of the locality needs to be sustained and resist against hegemony of the empire. That's why I think imagining a new Eurasia should be formed in and by the smaller states, like here in Korea. And the third exhibition, which will open in 2017, is called Mine, Yours, and Ours. And its subtitle is Borders and Territories and Unions. And this will look at the question of territorial grounds of states, nation states, society, and culture, and its association with history at a particular location at the continent. It's an ongoing examination. It's about raising questions or defining questions and articulating questions and shaping them much better than to look for the answer. Maybe Eurasia can never be defined as a one thing. And maybe that pursuit, the fact that it could not be defined as one thing, is the one thing that actually identifies it. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the stuff from the book, and some of them is just kind of ad-lib. So let's see, I need to find my mouse again and shut this off. Okay. Okay, so this is the cover of the book. And Imagining Eurasia, which is subtitled Visualizing a Continental History, is a research art project that visualized the historical precedents and contemporary reconstruction of Europe and Asia as one continent. Through photograph, video, graphics, animation, and text, the project highlights the significance of cities, networks, and territories within urban, regional, and continental geography, and the new relationship that may be forming between the East and the West. So in the book, there is basically laid out in 3 chapters, like 3 exhibitions. And it investigates the movement of commerce, migration, and cultural exchanges that have morphologically shaped the points, lines, and areas in the space and time of Eurasia. So the first chapter is basically dealing with points. It's very simple, kind of like mathematics. Then the second chapter is about lines, in other words, networks. And then the final chapter is dealing with areas, And you will see how that evolved. The video you saw only shows first 2 exhibitions. The project was commissioned by and exhibited at Asia Culture Center in Gwangju, okay, from 2015 to 2017. So the first chapter, Here, There, and Everywhere, Eurasian City. Now, by the way, some of these images are from the book and some are not from the book. The only way you can tell is that if you see page numbers at the bottom. Okay. So within that first exhibition, there is 3 works. One of them is called Dismembered Globes and Mashed Locals. Is made of panoramic photos and videos of different cities that have been grouped together or superimposed upon each other. So these are kind of still images that were later turned into more animated quality. When these images are combined, they appear to inaugurate a singular and seamless landscape. But in fact, it is exactly opposite. Instead, it is a collection of extracted fragments from the continuous terrain of Eurasia. This artificial seamlessness is a visualization of the contemporary notion of continuity, where the hyper-globalized section of various cities have been extracted from their less globalized area, creating an exclusive connectivity between cities that essentially abandons all other areas around them or in between them. Thus, this new continuity is no longer seamless, but instead, I'm sorry, I already said that. So the idea of connectivity is the new geography of continuity. In other words, nothing has to be physically continuous, just a section from each chosen location would be connected to each other, and everything else would essentially become irrelevant and disappear. But when we compound these images from different cities or mash them onto each other, they generate kind of dioramic clashes induced by the generic destiny of commerce, media, and tourism, meaning that if you go to any airport in the world, you find the same stores, right? With resistance from the local, rurals, and industries who are concerned about their eventual disenfranchisement. So the rest of them would essentially kind of disappear in the long run. Together, they are linked, Thus, Eurasia is a city and is no longer a continent, an endless and transformative space where distinctive economic, political, and cultural processes with distinctive urban histories are mashed into each other, encapsulating a dysfunctional and incoherent landscape of moments in transition. So in other words, that nothing remains constant, steady, that it is always in the process of evolving each other. So that's why the photograph is turned into animations to reflect the idea of something static into continuous motion. These panoramic videos were made by animating composite panoramic photographs that I took during my expeditions through Eurasia from 2006 to 2008. So let's go. So one example would be this, where essentially this thing actually circles around 360 all around you in this pavilion that I showed you before. I'll explain that a little bit more later. So you're only really seeing maybe like 1/4 of it. There's also, all the videos come with a soundtrack, music that was produced by, I forget his name now. It's a very famous this is actually my favorite one. Let me see. Sorry, I have to find my mouse again. This is just two cities. I like the simplicity of it and the subtle changes between the different architecture of two cities. One is Delhi and one is Shenzhen in China. And how they produce a kind of effect and transition from each other that I feel very, I don't know what the right word was, very kind of seductive in a sense. So let me see if I have another one to show. Oops, I think I skipped that. Okay, so, all right. Let me see. Or you can also interrupt me anytime if you have any questions. I'm always having trouble with my mouse here. Okay. So this floating Eurasia is a pavilion that I designed with an architect named Bare in Seoul. And it was really inspired by basically panoramas and dioramas that were very popular during the second half of the 19th century. This was actually my first concept that I presented when I first proposed the idea to Asia Culture Center. So it ended up really defining the whole project. And in the research and visualization and production of all the video works inside. And I used this for all three exhibitions. Oops, sorry. And I suspended entire pavilion from the ceiling because after 2 months of trying to figure out how to work this out, the problems of not breaking the panorama, finally it ended up resulting to hanging from the ceiling, which scared the shit out of me for several months because they just hang from like, I can't remember, like 6 points of cables, and they're just bolted into cement floor. And these bolts are not that big, they're about this big. And so if it came down, you know, I have to probably find myself one-way flight from Beijing to Pyongyang, you know? And, but fortunately, it was fine. I mean, I actually had one of the wonderful story about this is that, of course, you know, you hire an engineer to do this work, but engineering is basically numbers, right? It's just calculation. But the reality is the bolts and the screws and the glues, you know, basically it's glue, right? So I inquired about, searched for a person that had experience of working, like building bridges, who would have experience of how actually things work in job site. This man showed up, he was like past 75, maybe even 80, I don't know. Small guy, he just basically got on, I don't know, you can't really see it, but on top, it's not very wide, you know, it's about this wide. He walked on top of that thing without any safety rope, and he looked up to the cable, and he said, okay. So I hired him every year to look at this thing, because if a man can walk up like that, I would trust them, right? So the thing is, 55 feet is oval shape in length and 48 feet wide. The bottom, it's 13 feet tall, the projection wall, and it's suspended where the bottom is 4 foot 6 inches from the exhibition space, which was kind of intentionally to, because one of the problems that I tried to solve was the handicap access, right? Now, the old panoramas, what they used to do was that it was always on the second floor or below. You have a stair in the middle. You either walk up, come down. So you enter in the panorama in the middle of it, right? So that you don't have anything to break up the image around you. Because once you break that image, it breaks up the illusion that it tried to create reality, right? I don't know if you've ever been to any of these panoramas. I remember one in the Netherlands, of the seascape, and they have like the sand and then some real objects, and then behind it is incredible painting, right? Not to the style of old Dutch classic painters, but pretty good, And so this allowed basically children and people in the wheelchair to enter completely, without any problem. But people who are normal, they have to bend down and bow into this space. So it kind of reversed the privilege of the normal and handicapped. So it was basically kind of like Mongolian yurts, obviously, when you think about Genghis Khan, right? And it was a fabric skin was applied over, and you saw that video of how it was built, right? Believe it or not, the whole exhibition, the walls, the floor, I had to put a whole new carpet, curtains all around it, all new lighting, and this structure, and the exhibition display, everything. 38 days. Okay. Now, there's a story I read in a paper a year ago that there was a new plan for a new metro line in LA connecting 2 other lines for like 3 miles long. And they announced the opening year of that line to be 2049. Okay? It's embarrassing to announce it, right? It's like 80-mile high-speed train crashes on its inaugural run. Okay, so beneath its fabric surface, which was actually bought in some, fabric store, cheap, shiny one that I wanted from famous Dongdaemun market, right, which is the shopping nirvana for all the Chinese tourists coming in. They come in one day, they don't even stay overnight. They come in one day and they shop like 10 to 4 a.m. They get discount, and then next day they take a flight out. So that fabric was brilliant. It was just more than I imagined. It looked like a metal. It never broke in 3 years once, right? Cut and things. So beneath the fabric lies outline of 100 important cities of Old and New Silk Road. As you can see, this is kind of like one of the old maps. This is the new Silk Road that Xi Jinping is promoting, that China is investing huge amount of money to build roads and infrastructure across Eurasia. And so these are the, let's say, get all these old maps of different cities, and then we abstracted them, and then we created this kind of cutouts of the shape, and they were actually positioned all around the pavilion so that it creates this kind of illusion. And then it was actually done by, the door handles. They have, the doors, right? They have a closure on the top that when you close it, it slows it down and it closes quietly. We used that arm. It gave us like 22 centimeter of in and out projection as a motor. And that's how it was put underneath that fabric. And The person who actually, engineering guy who built this whole thing, he was amazing. Not once this thing broke in 3 years, any one of those motors. And he was so proud of when this was done that I just appreciate people doing good work, and they're so happy about their work. And I was very glad to have somebody like him to work with. So the circular ramp leads to the viewing platform inside. I decided not to put any chairs because I want the viewers to keep moving rather than being stationary, sitting in one place. So they can wander around in the space and to see it the way they want to see it, or be attracted by a certain kind of peripheral visions, just as how we experience the actual landscape. So this is the space in which was built. So the first picture you saw, that hallway is pointer is like back to here. And then, so everything is enclosed here, so there's no sound. There was a huge space here, like all the size of a basketball court. And so the sound and the light is completely shut off. New walls were built, and I put black curtains all around to get rid of all the walls that were distracting. And then this was the pavilion, and then this is the ramp up, and this is the platform. And this whole other space was used for exhibition. And then you exit out here. So the second show was called From, To, and In Between, a theater of networks. And this was about how the ambitions and wishes and fantasies of people, material, and knowledge have over time inscribed enduring patterns and pathways upon the geography of the continent of Eurasia. In there, a grand network have shaped and defined continent since the ancient times. And they are not all that new, nor are they only digital. Wars, religions, trades, and other dynamic forces have forged relations and caused disturbances between different cultures and states over many territories and topographies. Filled with massacres and pillages, not simply data, these pathways have been prized and contested. Only a fictional theater could free us from the tyranny of such horrible networks. Using allegorical images and fantastical legends from Eurasian history, I created 6 fictional characters representing merchants, migrants, travelers, explorers, and conquerors, along with their key materials of trades, such as silk or fossil oil. The characters are then presented in figures in motion across the allegorical landscape. That was what was presented inside the pavilion, projected a series of, and then greeted by a series of double-sided billboards like those found at typical city bus stops, shopping malls, or a movie theater. Against various banal locations in Eurasia, these fictional characters are figuratively dramatized and baited in particular colors. Now, the photos behind it was my photos, and the silhouettes were made from different, let's say, photographs or illustrations from books and images, and they were kind of created and composited on top of them. So what was inside is this video, which is actually just like a kind of like a small portion of the 360. And what you see is that I kind of move around to just capture particular areas. And then I wrote a narrative.
나는 네트워크의 여신이며 새로운 유라시아를 창조할 여신이다. 내가 구상하는 유라시아 대륙에서 유럽과 아시아는 이제 더는 나뉘지 않는다. 나의 네트워크는 하나의 체계, 하나의 문화, 하나의 역사로 모든 것을 연결할 것이다. 6명의 인물이 나의 네트워크에서 유라시아 부분을 이끌어갈 것이다. 에로로니아레스는 모든 정복자를 제패한 이로 모든 국가를 종식시키고 낡은 도시를 허물어 새 도시를 세운다. 그는 역사적인 이동로를 따르며 새로운 길을 개척하고 내 세상의 만찬장에서 모든 독립적인 사람들을 집어삼키며 어리석은 이들을 학살하고 원주민을 약탈한다. 트래비스 허는 모든 탐험가, 여행자, 선교사의 아버지로서 지도를 만들고 적대 세력들을 기록하며 종교 분쟁을 퍼뜨린다.
So those images that you saw was really different kind of like Silk Road, old or pipelines, or certain movements of the trades.
그는 모든 분파의 추종자를 시민화하여 네트워크의 동지로 전향하게 한다. 아데스 나라에는 모든 교역과 상인을 관장하는 나의 감사관이다. 도처에 선박, 열차, 비행기를 보내 네트워크의 힘을 주입한다. 돈의 어머니인 교역은 무한한 네트워크를 구축하기 위한 자본을 내게 가져다주며 상인들은 속세에서 내 세금을 걷어주는 이들이다. 슬라버 우리 레피안트는 국가와 신념의 마찰을 주장한다. 군사 정치적 갈등에 불을 지피고 대규모 인구 이동을 촉발한다. 이주민, 난민, 노예, 관광객을 영원한 이동의 횡포에 올가넣어 스스로의 출신과 정체성을 매도하게 한다. 나는 벤티오 크놀로 드렐리를 종교, 문화, 기술 분야의 선전 책임자로 임명했다. 그는 선전 내용을 분류해 검열하며 사람들이 유라시아에 있는 나의 네트워크를 통해서만 충족할 수 있는 기동성에 중독되도록 선전한다. 또한 나는 유라시아라는 개념이 오랫동안 무시되어 왔다는 점에 동의한다. 근대에 이르러 유럽은 공격적 태도로 군사적, 기술적 우위를 이용해 수동적인 아시아를 제국주의의 무대로 삼았다. 그리하여 착취자와 피착취자의 지리적 분리가 대륙에 각인되었다. 그러나 아시아가 떠오르는 지금 새로운 관계가 정립되고 새로운 네트워크가 나타날 것이다. 내가 신뢰하는 인물 중 마지막 사람인 말릭 로딩은 동양과 서양을 다시 이을 새로운 실크로드를 능란하게 구축하고 있다. 유럽과 아시아에 유라시아주의가 널리 퍼지게 될 것이다. 네트워크를 구축할 때 항상 그렇듯 현지 저항 세력이 있다. 유라시아의 어떤 나라가 새로운 세계 제국이 되기를 원하거나 그저 새로운 실크로드의 상업으로 부유해지기를 원할 수도 있다. 또 다른 나라는 풍부한 에너지 자원을 이용해 영광스러운 과거를 재건하길 바란다. 국가를 뛰어넘은 연합이 외부의 제국과 손잡고 유라시아의 중심에서 내전, 민족전쟁, 종교전쟁을 만들어내기도 한다. 뒤에 설명한 두 집단은 앞서 설명한 두 집단이 힘을 모아 자신에게 대항하지 못하게 하려 한다. 이러한 불량 국가들은 모두 내가 계획한 대로 곳곳에 혼돈, 파괴, 위기를 불러일으키고 있다. 여기서 파괴되는 것은 바로 다극성의 지정학과 여기서 비롯할 것으로 기대되는 민주주의에 대한 약속이다. 결국 모든 국가와 문화가 서로를 괴멸시켜 대륙 차원의 디스토피아가 출현할 것이다. 공포와 희망의 주인으로서 나는 살아남은 이 모두에게 유라시아 네트워크의 유토피아를 약속하는 바이다. 역사는 유사하게 되풀이되지만 지리는 제 자리를 지킨다. 그리고 내가 바로 역사와 지리를 유라시아에 다시 새겨 넣을 네트워크의 여신이다.
Okay, where's my mouse again? Okay. So, I think I'm just going to go right through that because we're running out of time here. Another work was called Tales of Movement and Inscribed Topographies, and there were 63 cities in Eurasia threaded together, and to produce this 6-strip of image tables. And images are colored as like was in the fictional characters in the beginning. And they're laid out roughly in the pattern of Silk Road. And there are historical contemporary image of maps, images, and text composited together to create this kind of let's say, linear narrative, but also very multi-layered and rhizomatic. And it's an archival map about complexity of relationship, which cannot be simplified through deductions. And then there were things that were constructed to show, like, for instance, topography between different cities that are indicated in these areas of lines below. And then a lot of these images were also coming from my own travels. For example, during the Shrinking City project in 2002 to 2003 in these cities, you see the images here from those encounters. For instance, a man and a sheep was when I was shooting panoramic video. Several hundred sheep came up, surrounded me, and it was because these East Germans lost their jobs after unification, so some of them retorted into a kind of primordial living condition. You see a man over there. Oh, I'm sorry. This man, I didn't have the picture. So, and then the man that is walking with a suitcase is walking through the same field that I was with the sheep, and he actually walked by 3 times from appearing nowhere, from middle of the woods into woods, and behind it, is the chemical factory that used to employ 30,000 people during the East German DDR, GDR period. And sometimes you find incredible, like, department store architecture from, that was from Leipzig. Oh, yeah, airport in Ivanovo, Russia, closed down with some, then I run into there, some Iranian-American guy with some Russian girlfriend coming in, trying to buy this place. You know, middle of nowhere, pretty unusual. This is a project, Lost Highway Expedition, that Kavior mentioned, where we met first time on the way to Sarajevo. In these projects, there were all these, we spent 2 days in each city, 1 day of travel in between different programs. And also Europe Lost and Found, for instance, like gypsies in like one image, there's a couple of gypsy men there living outside of Napoli. A man on the boat on the top is like shipped from, I can't remember where they were from, but they were basically not allowed to enter Italy, so they were kind of floating a large ship out in the port. A lot of interesting encounters that are all kind of used to make those images. Of course, in the New Silk Road project that I did before, I traveled to these cities and collected and produced this exhibition that is actually in the book as an introduction. And then the last chapter of this project, Mine, Yours, and Ours, subtitled Border Territories and Unions, is a set of visualization on how people, culture, and states have defined their existence in the space and time of Eurasia. And in this one, late Eurasia was basically a collection of interviews that I made during my travel through 13 cities in 60 days, from Seoul, Singapore, Hong Kong, Beijing, Kashgar in western Xinjiang province near Central Asia, Urumqi, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Tbilisi, Georgia, Israel, London, Brussels, Berlin, and Moscow. So there are different issues, and they were presented, like, for instance, in this video, this is actually one of the great monuments of Soviet built for friendship between Soviet and Georgians. Georgians hate Soviets, particularly Russians. And this is in ruin, as many of like old Soviet and Yugoslav monuments. There are some really amazing pieces of sculptures. They're all abandoned. The only people who come to see this is Iranians and maybe some like South Asians like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. This is actually on one of the, in the Caucasus Mountains outside of about 100 miles from Tbilisi. And then I started collect, I don't know if I have time to show the video of that. It's only the interviews. Maybe I should show that. That was the last one, this one. So in the exhibition, I made 3 short videos. One of them is about borders. Where's the sound? Maybe the video doesn't have a sound. I didn't include it. Okay, so that's not working. All right, so we'll just go back to so, you know what, I should turn off that because it's going to go on to some other video and surprise us later. Oops, what happened? I lost my keynote. Oh, I shut the keynote out. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so the final work, not the final work, next to the final work is History According to Insignificant Object. History is written by those who are literate. I'm talking about before the modern period. Thus, by the ruling elites. It has been forever edited and dramatized and altered according to the interest of the sovereign or economic power that controls borders, territories, and unions. And for those who are illiterate and uneducated, or conquered, or subjugated, history has remained non-textual, rather recorded and found objects. Departing from this singular and dominant history, I have collected insignificant objects from the marginal places of the cities that I visited during my expedition. Mostly stones, bricks, and metals. I have given them an imaginary identity and contextualize them with maps, photographs, and news of events that are significant to their place of origin. In the exhibition, they are displayed on a set of two converging tables where each objects become historically significant, maybe even phenomenal. Dramatized by supportive imageries, they together suggest multiple and alternate narratives with their own distinctive world history. So in 2000, for example, I can explain some of these only with few images as opposed to a number of images were in the exhibition. For instance, in 2001, the Chinese government announced its, quote, great opening up and development of the Western region, unquote, program. Commonly known as Go West, it led to the massive transformation of Kashgar, the spiritual and cultural heart of the Uyghur people, into just another typical Chinese city, which is following in the footsteps of the success of the special economic zones on the east coast of China. Now, you probably heard in the news these days about Uyghur people being face recognized, imprisoned, and so on. Kashgar was occupied territory. It was one of the most unlikely, terrible place to visit, actually. As more and more Han Chinese people migrated into the city, the old walled city of Kashgar was completely destroyed, with the only small part remaining as theme park for Chinese tourists. Legend has it that each time a house in old Kashgar was torn down, a teapot was broken in protest. And most popular teapot broken had the shape of a person riding a horse, symbolizing the nomadic heritage of Uyghur culture. Then, in a poor collective farm in Baoziadanzen, west of Urumqi in Xinjiang, China, lived an Uyghur man who drove a truck on the G3112 highway that leads toward Kazakhstan. His uneventful life was disturbed by a master plan from the Beijing to build a mega logistic station for driverless trucks, and as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative that would connect the Yellow Sea with Baltic Sea. This meant he would lose his job and home because thousands of homes and farms would have to be destroyed. In protest, the Uyghur man attacked the government engineers with a wooden stick that had used to mark the demolition of his home. He was then arrested and subjected to brutal torture, like in Hong Kong today or yesterday, and his death in prison became a rallying cry for Uyghur communities in China and Kazakhstan. Facing this protest, along with other opposition movements, such as deep sea ports in Gwadar in Pakistan, or Kayap Phu in Myanmar, or Hambantota in Sri Lanka, China continues to buy and occupy vast amounts of land in other countries to further develop so-called Bridge and Road Initiative projects. In Balkania, the Federal Republic of Western Balkans was formed by 6 countries from the former Yugoslavia and Albania in Western Balkan. The only nations in Europe that are not members of the European Union. In opposition to economic imperialism of the European Union and its Islamophobic foreign policy, Balkania is a multi-religious state where Muslim, Christians, Jews, and others can live together, as was in the former Yugoslavia or even under the Ottoman and Habsburg empires for centuries. Balkania has opened its border to refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and other victims of war, and welcomes the deportees from the European Union. This is going on, all the time. There are people who are. There's one friend in Serbia that Zalimir Zelnik, who used to make a film about gypsies are being evicted from Germany, and they always come back to Belgrade airport. So he goes to meet them, and then he takes them to, kind of like, people now being deported to Mexico, and they never lived in Mexico, right? And so he makes kind of fictional and reality mixed together. And so I was kind of resonating from that, and the new headquarters of Balkania was built above the unfinished construction site of the Museum of the Revolution of Yugoslavia inside the Park of Friendship in Belgrade, where the first summit of the non-aligned movement took place in 1961. Those who don't know, non-alliance movement is the people during the Cold War who didn't want to align either to the Soviet or the West. They're usually countries that were in Southeast Asia or in Africa, and India, and Nehru in India, who was the Egyptian, Nasser, and Tito from Yugoslavia were the main figure. Germany was increasingly becoming non-German, given the massive migration from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other nations. Rapidly aging and with low birth rate, Germany needed more productive people who could support its ever-growing numbers of pensioners. This was an unfortunate mistake that, what's her name, Chancellor made, for Angela Merkel. For Germany to survive, it had to become a non-German state. As expected, national sentiment rose in response, and anti-immigrant parties and extremist groups blossomed. One of them, called Patriots Against Islamization of the West, or PEGIDA, an Islamophobic and anti-refugee extreme group, even demanded a separate state for native Germans inside Germany. They announced that abandoned former Soviet military base in Wunzendorf outside of Berlin would become their capital of the new state for PEGIDA. Originally built by Bismarck, then used by Nazis, this rotunda was later added to display the panoramic paintings of Russia's liberation of Berlin in World War II, which was titled The Battle for the Reichstag. Is now the command center for PEGIDA operation for deportation and extermination of foreigners. Finally, it was inevitable that China and Russia would become brothers. They were forced to join when the United States continued to challenge China over South China Sea, blamed China for North Korea's development of intercontinental missiles. Meanwhile, NATO and European Union strangles Russia, and when Ukraine finally joined them after losing Crimea and Donetsk to Russia. Alexander Dugin, the so-called Putin's Rasputin, became the new president of Russia. His political religion of new Eurasianism against Atlanticism gained strong support in Russia. China began to invest and buy Russian oil. Dugin opened Russia for the penetration of China's Belt and Road, the alliance culminating with China joining European Economic Union, making it Eurasian Economic Union, making the largest territorial union in the history of civilization, even much bigger than Soviet Union. So the final work is the game of unification, which is a three-player card game that I made for this project. On the face side of each of the 36 cards is one character from Korean alphabet, with urban images of either Seoul or Pyongyang as the background. Printed on underside of the card is maps of borders, territories, and unions from around the world. The game is played on round table that is divided into 3 parts, each painted according to the most popular colors used on the flags of world's nation: red, blue, and white, not red, white, and blue. One player would play South Korea, another North Korea, and the third, the internationals. Each player can hold 6 cards at a time and can exchange 1 card at each turn. They can give or take cards from each other or from remaining stack of cards. All players can see the Korean characters of the card held by each other players. The objective for North Korea and South Korean players is to collaborate by exchanging cards so that their set of 6 cards they had would spell out unification in Korea, 동일. The role of international player is to constantly disrupt them so that they would never succeed in spelling out unification. So I just have to kind of put down the names of the people that worked with me on this project for each of the 3 exhibitions, and also people who participate in another project that I didn't mention that came from 77 different cities, 45 different countries in Eurasia. And finally, at the end is some of my team that I worked in Korea, and they're really great young people that I had pleasure to work for 3 years with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyung. I think because there's not too much time left, maybe I'll ask one question and open up the Q&A to the audience in case other people have questions. So one question I have is, so you talked about this a bit. There's a whole section in the book where you go around doing interviews with people in different cities. And there's an interesting moment in your interview with the director of the Economic Policy Research Center in Georgia, in Tbilisi, in which she really resists your use of the term Eurasia.
Yes.
And she says that is a Russian concept.
Imperialist term.
Yeah, and Georgia does not belong to Eurasia. And she's connecting it to Dugin and Dugin's argument that Russia shouldn't be trying to make an empire, but a Eurasian economic union. And you also mentioned the notion of Eurasia being promoted by Xi Jinping in terms of especially his infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative. And so it seems that Eurasia is a concept that has been used to form hegemonic relationships, and a more sort of subtle strategy in terms of power. Now, my question for you is, how do you see your project engaging with this discourse as well as these political agendas? And what is the urgency, or like what is the desire to claim this term?
Well, Georgians, they basically want to escape from Soviet Union and especially Russia. Georgians don't see themselves to be connected to, they see themselves more connected to the West. They see themselves as more as a European, okay? There is a rift in terms of the religious belief. The people that are especially north and the other side of the mountains in Caucasus is mostly Muslims. Chechnya, for example, where you had 2 wars with Russia after USSR collapsed, is one of the so-called the contentious region, breeding radical Islam, terrorists or whatever, and so there's a great deal of effort to distinguish themselves, to get away from that yoke, and to join European Union. Okay. They are Christians, majority of them. In fact, their heritage, they were the first, one of the first to really accept Christian religion, and they're actually, a lot closer to Jerusalem than than Rome was, So it's understandable that history. Now, in terms of the there are situations similar to Ukrainians who also resent Russians. They want to join European Union as well, and that was the problem in 2014 with their effort to join European Union and so on. And it's a long, complicated story, but to get back to the issue you asked about whether that Putin or Xi, how they figure in Eurasia. Obviously, they are the 2 biggest power and the land possession in Eurasia. Probably, more than half of the Eurasia, right? And of course, that the what would determine the future of the world vision, that for me is difficult to imagine the idea of which is better choice, right? Putin, Xi, Trump. We don't have much of good choice here at all, unless if you're a Trump supporter, then it's great, And so I don't really see it that way. That's why I look at the Eurasia as a history and as a geography, historical geography in a long view. These are the politicians that are with us temporarily. What would happen to all of us here would be now determined not by any one of those 3, any one of us in this room, but even something more powerful and greater than us, which is history. The history will take us to our next immediate future, for sure. And that history is something that we can do nothing about. We are powerless, and our only chance is to survive it. Okay? And when you see the history of that land, you will understand that that's where we're headed to. So, our daily life goes on rather kind of, your trouble with traffic or whatever, but something much larger is looming ahead of us. So I'm not really that pessimistic. I mean,
Just need to survive.
Yeah. Right.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, just maybe one last thought/question, actually, just building off of what you just said. In another question I had prepared, in an interview with Octavio Zaya, who you worked with for the New Silk Roads, which was the earlier version of what became Imagining Eurasia, you talked about how you really relied on, quote, anti-expert knowledge. And then you said that that's something that functions as a counterweight to specialized and isolated disciplinary history. So what you were talking about in terms of people who simply like live and materials that you are gathering when you're traveling through cities, is that the anti-expert knowledge that you're referring to, or?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, this is something that I think I've learned when I was working and living in Detroit. And I made my first artwork ever was 2000, was called Detroit Making It Better For You. It was actually a fictional video. And to make that, I made a kind of I'm like big, what do you call, conspiracy thinker. And the story was that 50 years ago, people basically left so-called what we call white flight then. They took everything with them and just moved out to the suburbs, right? Jobs, money, and so forth. Their family too. And then left the city to burn down to ground, which is kind of literally what happened. If you go to Detroit, it looks like the whole city is burned. And then they blame everything to the black people, and especially Coleman Young, the mayor for 20 years, was a very good target. In fact, he has a legendary quotation book. Like when there was a Democratic convention, they asked him on the live television, "Hey, Mayor, we heard you something like you use foul languages in your office." He said, "Oh yeah, who the fuck said that?" Right? Something like that, right? And so the idea was that they would come back 50 years later, buy everything dirt cheap, and redevelop it, and make tons of money along the way, just like they made the money when they moved out to the suburbs, right? And turned the farms into golf course, into subdivision, basically, and shopping malls too. Which is what's happening now in Detroit. Detroit is a comeback city. It's like really booming in certain sections. What's his name? There's a guy who's buying up. He owns the...
Quicken Loans? Yeah,
Quicken Loans. He used to pay LeBron James, not anymore. He's from suburb of Detroit, and he's been buying up properties, crazy, and redeveloping areas. So from there, I thought about, hey, like there's so many books about Detroit. What's the reason to have another expert book about Detroit? So when I lived there, I learned through like stories from people. I heard rumors of things like, shutting down the freeway so that people can't escape if there was a riot. So that, people would basically burn, everything among themselves or whatever. And so I put a story together, and there I've learned how to learn from the experience of being there, right? So I hope that I would continue this project, but in much more intimate ways, more on the ground in the future, to be more in touch with stories and tales and even fables, myth, and so on, that still goes on to understand something that is difficult to believe is happening around you, And but I do, read a lot, wonder about distant places, so I can't physically get out of here myself, but mentally I escape through stories that other people have written about different places around the world. Sometimes something beautiful, sometimes something that is horrible, but still it's a story that is very interesting. Yeah.
What do you see as the
Well, I think, being such an optimist, I can't really say much about, except that China basically is going to take over Hong Kong, In fact, one of my fictional stories is about that, over time, 50 years of the one country, two system agreement, now it's 20 years. They're more and more becoming China, less Hong Kong of the British, era or international era. China is a big power, big country, and eventually they will put more Chinese in Hong Kong, push the earlier people out. This is a part of the demographic changes. It will happen to Taiwan. And I think the biggest worry is that what's going to happen with Korea. Korea is basically pinned between only the empires, border with China, Russia, and Japan. Behind Japan is United States, right? Korea cannot decide anything on their own. It will be decided by those other around them, So it's about survival, And so it's the same issue. But China would be, I suppose, if we think historically, they are a different empire than Americans or Russians empire. They had expansionist ideas, history, but not like the measure and the degrees of territories and violence as a Russian empire moved all the way to Pacific Ocean at the same time where the Europeans were conquering North America and South America, but I'm just talking about the United States, right? Or moving across, they were moving same time, opposite direction, So we were my experience the last time in China was horrible. I've heard that it's becoming very repressive since Xi, and it's really true that the society is becoming more controlled and working in more fear, especially intellectual communities. So it doesn't look very good, but it doesn't look very good here either. Yes. Yeah. I didn't stay around to watch them play. I haven't played it myself. I think it works. I don't have the card with me, and they're all unfortunately in Seoul. And next time I get hold of my own work, let's play together in somewhere.
It'll be a Gyopo event.
Yeah. And we're invite. I send one to Kim Jong-un if I could. Yeah. Okay, I think our time is up, and yes.
Hi, Kyung. It's such a large project, but I was wondering what's next. Is there something you missed?
What's next? I'm working on something, but it's going to take some time, and so yeah, hopefully that I'll be able to continue it in a different way through more travel and more on the land through being on the land, traveling on land as opposed to hopping air to air. Although I got a $320 flight from Moscow to Seoul on Aeroflot.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Hyung.